Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to Bond Group in Waltham, Massachusetts, we're driving this 2003 BMW M3 convertible. And I should say 2003.5. It's an 03.5, which is important because when you get around back, you'll notice this is an LCI car, or life cycle impulse in BMW language, which in everywhere else is just a facelift. It's the mid-cycle refresh. But the M3 didn't quite get the same mid-cycle refresh or LCI package that the rest of the E46 generation got. In fact, the E46 M3 basically just got some taillights and a slight change to this. I'm pretty sure this is slightly shorter than the earlier cars. But there's a couple tweaks on the interior, but otherwise, it's largely the same. You don't get a new front end. And today, I think the E46 M3 represents luxury, style, performance, all of these great attributes of a good daily driver or weekender driver's car. But in period, these things were punching way above their weight, and they were competing with some heavy hitters. In fact, if you had an E46 M3 in the early 2000s, it meant you were a proper car guy who cared about the numbers. It's powered by an S54, the 3.2-liter inline 6 with dual overhead cams and variable valve timing, or VANOS in BMW language, and it revs to 8,000 RPM. They were available in 6-speed manuals, as this one is, and also in 6-speed SMG, which is a sequential manual gearbox. This had SMG2, then later you get SMG3 in the E60 M5. That's a single clutch automated manual, and for those of you who don't want an SMG, don't want to pay the premium on a manual, but do want a manual M3, well, you can buy the SMGs a bit cheaper and then convert them for a small cost. It's not that hard because it's the same transmission. You just have to orchestrate how that's operating, add a clutch pedal and all that good stuff. While Motorsport down in Walpole, where I have my M5 service, they do a lot of those services on these things. But my God, this was just the best era of BMW, in my opinion. I have an E39 M5, so I may be biased, but I think one of my favorite things about this car is how this little crease, this belt line, it disappears beneath the bulge. It's literally taking a regular non-M E46 and then bulging it out, almost like it's a Photoshop job. And it's like showing you where that bulge is with this stuff. It looks so good. But like I said, 03.5 and up got the LCI refresh, but not much changed. In fact, if you put this next to an 03.5 or 04, 05, 06, 330 CI or something like that, this is the older front end. I do think this is a more muscular front end. The headlights are a little bigger. They're not quite as slimmed down as they became, but it is interesting that the M3 never really got the new front nose. And back in these days, M cars were a little more subtle. Sure, you've got the bulges, but you weren't putting on crazy wheels. They're just 18-inch wheels. You see M3 on the sides on these little grills and on the back, which is a little more pronounced than you would get on the M5. M5 only showed it on the back. And then you get the killer M mirrors. The car looked so complete. And this is the thing, everything today is so flat. You don't get these creases or these little plastic pieces here or the ground effects. Everything today just feels like it's designed for a manufacturing facility to be able to stamp as many doors, as many body panels as possible without wearing out, versus these days it felt like they were really making something. And I don't know, maybe it's just because these were the cars that were hot and around when I was in high school and early college, and these were aspirational cars to me. But I do think I'm right. Down here we've got the quad exhaust, sounding fantastic. What's great about these is, yes, it's an inline 6, but the exhaust is split up into 2 banks. So it is kind of really a dual exhaust. It's just that each bank represents 3 cylinders. Let's get under the hood because I think this is the real star of the show here. And there she is. We've got individual throttle bodies, so every cylinder gets its own throttle body. And these are fantastic. They are a little bit needy. They require 10W60 for oil, so that's a little expensive. They can be leaky, they can be weepy, so you do have to keep up with things like that. But the earlier cars were more needy than the later cars because the 01 and 02 seem to have more rod bearing failures than later cars. And I know, BMWs and rod bearings, at this point we're just used to it. You just replace them. Later cars seemingly were a little more robust from memory. So if I'm wrong about that and you've got an 03 or an 04 or an 06 that has gone bust because of rod bearings, let me know in the comments. But these seem to be pretty darn stout. However, you did need to do valve adjustments because they were not hydraulic lifters. So over time, you still had to do a little more labor-intensive maintenance because this is essentially a race engine. It was great. And the biggest thing about this car as a phase shift for BMW in the United States was that we never got the good E46 M3 with the S50. We got kind of a neutered S52 that had 240 horsepower instead of like the 300 plus horsepower powerhouse with the individual throttle bodies that they got in Europe. So this was our first like real M3 after the E30, and the E30 is just a different equation altogether with its 4-cylinder S14. This was a big deal. You can tell this one is BMW Silber Grau Metallic. Very nice. I do like this color, and the M3s look really good. And M3s look really good in the German rainbow, meaning gray, black, white, like simple colors, but they look fantastic in red. And Phoenix Yellow, Laguna Seca Blue, these are colors that have really resonated with people over the years, which is interesting because LSB, Laguna Seca Blue, always hit. That was never not cool. Phoenix Yellow, people had very cruel things to say about that color in period. It's come around and now people really like them, especially because they used to do crazy leather colors as well with the blue and the Phoenix Yellow. Up here, you'll notice no parking sensors. Those were optional front and rear. Actually, I don't remember if they had front or just rear, but either way, there's no parking sensors on this particular car, but it does have the headlight washers, which shoot out and then power wash your headlights, which is great. It's cool. It's always annoying if you accidentally pull that switch right after you've washed the car and then you've coated it with washer fluid. This one is a convertible, okay? And in period, people were always kind of poo-pooing the convertibles because, well, they weren't as stiff. That's not the real driver's car. It's heavier because it needs more chassis bracing and all this stuff. Well, today, who cares? We're not competing with anybody. You're probably not turning this into a track car. It's just gonna be a fun weekender, a great engine, and let's actually just get it started. So that way, while we're talking, we can listen to the nice bassy rumble of this S54. Oh, that never gets old. 53,000 miles on this car. That raspiness, good Lord, there's so much great induction noise in this car. And like I said, we're just on an 18-inch wheel. We've got plenty of sidewall. We've got a 225 section up front and a 255 in the rear. We've got some reasonable space in the boot. I'm actually gonna move this camera up front because we don't want that getting jostled around. I love this Fujifilm, but sometimes I just don't have a good place for it. And we'll put our plate on. But look, even with the roof stored here, it's plenty of room for your bags and all the things that you're gonna need to bring on the weekend trip. I've always loved the interiors of these cars. They're simple, they're to the point. They feel relatively high quality, although things do deteriorate. You'll see this sort of like marbling over here. On this side, that's the typical wear that you see on these interior panels. And it's okay. We're in a point now where these cars don't need to be perfect. They just need to be well maintained and driver friendly in terms of suspension and mechanical components, and hopefully she's not leaking any oil. That's really all that matters. Down here, you've got your central located window switches, which this is cool because with one switch, you can put up all 4 of these windows. And they still always had, even the coupes, these rear windows because despite not having like rolling down rear windows, they did push out. And that was an electronic thing, which is really neat. Let's go out for a drive. It absolutely loves high revs, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have any low-end torque. It's actually pretty easy to drive this around, and God, the bassy rumble this thing makes at low RPMs. Of course, I want to scream at 8,000, but I do really appreciate this. So before we get this off the line, let's take a look at this gauge cluster. This is iconic, and it's already reduced our limitations on the tachometer with these lights because it has kind of a variable tachometer to tell us how high we can rev it. Now we're warmed up, so that's really correlating to our water temperature, I believe, which is right here. And then underneath, that's our oil temperature. And all you want to do is make sure that you're between those two dots, that operating temperature, before you start really putting load on this engine. And then they will treat you well. But if you don't treat these engines well, they won't treat you well. So let's get out of here. Let's get these windows up. Oh, didn't like that one. I don't know why. There we go. Nice and courteous past traffic. So these do have a clutch delay valve, which a lot of people delete, and I think it's not a bad thing to have. What it does is there's just like a little throttle that when you release the clutch, it will only allow fluid through at a certain volume and speed, which means that you can never really clutch dump this car too hard. It's essentially just protecting itself from silly drivers or people who are going to do damaging things. And that's okay, but it does disconnect you a little bit from the directness of the experience. Some people do disconnect these and they change them. I don't really find it to be egregious or offensive. So while these are good performance cars, they're not drag racers, which means you do need to be relatively patient with your shifts. I find that not rushing shifts in BMWs is the way to extend their lives. I think a lot of people just destroyed these cars early on because they were just going crazy light to light, and that's just not like the purpose of what these cars really are. And I don't blame people for kind of doing that. It is fun to drive them fast. It is fun to rev them out, but this isn't a hard 1-2 kind of car. But because you've got all these revs to play with, like, you really don't find yourself needing to shift constantly. The gear ratios are fantastic, but also, like, third gear lasts a while. You're gonna be okay. So you're not finding yourself in this situation where you're like, oh my goodness, I'm just always having to shift. You can kind of wind out a gear, and these things start picking up after like 4,500 RPM. So you've got almost 4,000 RPMs to play with after that. And we do have a sport mode in the car. There's a little button down here. I'll show you once we get out of here. There you go. Little button here. And actually, I'll show you in second gear what this does. Okay, so we're sitting here. I'm going to hold constant throttle, right? I'm not going to move my foot. See how it jerked us forward a little bit? all it does is change the throttle mapping on these cars. It does not add power. It does not change the steering weight like it did on the E39 M5 E46 Sport button. It's a throttle sensitivity button. And while that can be good for maybe like sharper rev match downshifting, I find that I usually prefer longer resolution in a corner from cars like this to be beneficial as a driver. I don't want it too long, but that's the thing, is the regular normal mode in these cars was already pretty darn good. I'll just go into fuel efficiency mode, coasting down this hill off throttle. Oh, but this engine is iconic. This engine, this S54, it went into some good things, and people swap them into E36s all the time. Like, go to a racetrack, go look under the hood of a bunch of E36s. You're gonna find S54 swap E36s because it's perfect. It just adds the juice they were meant to have all along. But one of my favorite cars that got this S54 was the clown shoe, the Z3 Coupe, the M Coupe. And they didn't start that way. The original M Coupe had an S52, and that's what was powering the E46 M3. This is gonna be fun. We've got a whole cluster. I'll just, nice and tight. Thank you very much, good job. Everybody wins. And so for a couple years, the S52 powered the clown shoe, and of course the Roadster, but then the S54. That's just the crown jewel of these like motorsports inline sixes of the era. And people always had something to say about it. Not everybody likes the sound of these engines. I personally love them. I think there's more intake than exhaust that comes out of these cars, and that's more fun to me. I think that's more motorsportsy than just some shouty thing. The exhaust is a little quiet in these cars, but it's very like metallic. And for someone who's really into a muscle car or like a big shouty V8, this probably isn't going to scratch that itch. But someone who's into like European racing is probably going to really dig this. And then you can go ahead and put crazy intakes on these cars, carbon fiber boxes that make them sound even more ridiculous. I think Zach Clapman of the Smoking Tire actually just did that to his E46 M3. And I think his has like 1 million miles. He's probably got like a 200,000 mile car. But it goes to show, if you keep them alive and you put the correct modifications on them, they can really treat you well. I also think this is the perfect size vehicle. It's kind of like how we always talk about 997s in the Porsche world as being the correct size 911. This is the correct size M3. M3s are huge now. I just saw one at the top of a parking garage the other day. I guess it was an M4, but a coupe. It was like a bus. It looks like a school bus, and the color was really cool, but it was probably a wrap, and that's a bummer. But sometimes I'm just blown away at how big and bulky cars have gotten. Not to mention, this is rear-wheel drive only. There were no all-wheel drive M3s. This is like a proper front-engine, rear-wheel drive sports car. And I gotta say, I missed that. I know we went power crazy, and the reason we need all-wheel drive in all these cars now is not simply marketing, but it's honestly to get these things off the line with 500, 600 horsepower, you just need the traction off the line. But couldn't we go back to smaller, lighter, less powerful, and rear-wheel drive? See, that's where my sport button could have helped me with the rev match, because I went straight to the floor with the pedal, and it still didn't give me all the revs. So that is literally what that sport button is for, is just to make sure you're getting the revs up in time, which is great. Infotainment wise, good lord. All right, check out this GPS navigation. Let's see, I don't even remember. Let's go to the map. There we go. That's what we had back then. It's a DVD based system, if I remember correctly. I know they changed them over from CD to DVD over the years, but that's it. And if you didn't change and update your discs, which were outrageously expensive, I'm talking like $800 for discs, your maps were going to be outdated. No one's updating this over air. So, for example, like my M5, I don't think knows that the big dig happened in Boston. I'm pretty sure there's no tunnel there. So, hey, such is life. But you can also just monitor off. That's really what I always do when I get in these. There's upgrades, and you can get them now with like Apple CarPlay and all this stuff. But check this out. This one, I think because it's an 03.5, has a CD player here. My 01 M5 has a tape deck there, but that's how you would access that little eject button. All right, let's go sport mode. Sport mode. Little chirp off the line, which is kind of fun because traction control is a little antsy in these cars. The E39s as well. They weren't that smart. They just kind of cut power. Usually you just turn it off. It's not scary to drive these cars without traction control. They're not powerful enough to be frightening, but for the purposes of this video to show you what it'll do, that's it. In 6th gear, 70 miles an hour, 2,600 RPM. This thing just wants to run. It doesn't have a ton of torque, but it has enough to get the job done. And that's the thing, they're very confident and comfortable at like 80 to 100 miles an hour as cruising speeds. It'll go much faster than that for sure. And I gotta tell you, when I was younger and I was starting to like get into a variety of different cars, this was one of the first cars that let me know, like, oh, this is what the Germans are about. Now I understand why people like German cars. It's funny how I think of this as like a momentum car now, because cars have gotten so powerful and fast that this used to be like, wow, the power of an E46 M3. I mean, I was young and likely inexperienced, but still, getting in this today, it's certainly not underpowered, but it definitely doesn't feel as juicy as I remember the first times driving these. These had some interesting features, like it had rain sensing wipers. There's a sensor back here. You can plug or unplug it through this little clamshell if you open it up, and then it'll have rain sensing wipers. That was pretty good for the early 2000s. Down here on the blinker stock, there's a button that pushes in that says BC. That doesn't mean before Christ, it means board computer. Board computer. And if you don't believe me, it's because of this. The onboard computer, the board computer. So if you press that, it changes this display here with these little pixels that often burn out. And so people like to see that your pixels are intact on your dashboard, but it'll tell you your distance to empty and your average miles per hour, a time, temperature, all that good stuff. So you can get some information down there. Otherwise, you can get that information through here, you know, your range, your outside temperature, and consumption. Not tuberculosis, but fuel consumption. And to be able to hold this steering wheel, looking at this gauge cluster with the red needles, all these little things added up to a special car, because the standard cars had a different looking gauge cluster. They had white needles, they didn't have the red needles, and the steering wheel didn't have this M color weave on the interior. They still carry that out today. However, M as a brand has diluted itself quite a bit, much to their financial success, but much to the chagrin of purists like myself, because to be able to call something an M really, really meant something. And there were very few cars that embodied that thing that we lusted after. And now you can kind of get any car, any BMW, and get an M package on it. So it'll have fancy wheels or a different body kit, or maybe the interior bits, or the nicer seats or things like that. But back in this time period. If you had an M3, that was it. That was the pinnacle of the 3 Series. So there you go. I mean, it's not crazy powerful, but it's a driver's car. And once you get over the fact that this is a 0 to 60 car in about 5 seconds, and that it's not a lightweight, it's over 3,500 pounds, especially as the convertible, you just enjoy what it is to drive an M car of the early 2000s, because they were designed for people who liked driving. You don't need to beat anybody, but you're gonna get all the good feedback. You're gonna get an experience that is like reserved for those who sought it out. And while a standard 330 Ci or a 328 or even a 325, like still great cars, they just are missing like the secret sauce of these things, and they were worth the price of entry. And these cars still look as good as they drive today, which is really fun, because when you see a nice E46 M3, you see a connoisseur. You don't see someone who's left with the old stuff. You see someone who made a choice to preserve and maintain the good stuff. And I love that. I love when you see a car like this and you just know that the driver has kept it, not because they can't afford the next thing, it's just because they love the thing they had. So I'm gonna go bring this thing back to Bond Group, a little reluctantly, because I'm having a good time driving it, and it makes for a great daily driver. It makes for a good weekender, and heck, if you've got the coupe or you want to put like a little roll cage in this thing, still a formidable track star if you need to do the job. But these things just rip, and it's not like you're just buying an engine. You're buying this whole package, and there's like a smell about these things that really does the job. Oh, it's so good. So while we sit here waiting for some construction to take place, thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one. This HVAC system is insane, but really all you need to know is like fan speed, AC, and then this. This is what you need to know. If you want the car to be hot, it's not about hitting this button over here. It's about scrolling this little wheel from blue to red. And if you can do that, you'll get to have heat.